the later 1700s, angry patriotic colonists resented the stifling controls put in place by Great Britain. Some of these citizens took it into their own hands to combat what they saw as abusive policies by British leadership. Formally resisting through organizations like the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, they helped spread messages throughout the 13 colonies, resulting in small pockets of resistors making an effort to keep their land. It was because of these small bands of resistors that an entirely new nation was created, the United States of America. Similar fire-lit minds were seen in French citizens during German occupation of the nation of France in 1940 that assisted France and the Allied forces during World War II to successfully defeat relevant Axis forces with Germany. France was destroyed in 1940 because of the Germans. Tragic times like the Battle of France, unfair German war tactics, and the fraud of a trusted leader forced Frenchmen to persevere. Triumph was seen upon France after D-Day, when France won over their country, and when the French citizens finally saw light after 4 years of living a constant battle. Leaders called upon the people of France to resist in small or large groups to create a silent but active movement of French citizens resisting the invaders. The war ended in France's favor, but how did this happen? The Battle of France lasted from May 10th to June 25th, 1940. Italy joined Germany and declared war on France in hope of gaining France's land. Tragically, 4 days after Italy joined the Germans, Paris was taken over by Axis forces. From this unfortunate event France went through, came Philippe Pétain and his thoughts for a solution to regain France. Philippe Pétain was born in 1856 in northern France. In the year 1916, he strategically led the French army and was a military inspiration in World War I. He was a professor at the War College, where he came up with more advanced and strategic war plays. Because of this, his superiors and those higher ranked at the War College were overshadowed. He then became favored by the people around him, and because of his organized plans of defense and attack, he was seen as a strong leader and put in charge as the French went into the Second War. Pétain's short-term solution for the loss in the Battle of France was to request an armistice to be signed between France and Germany. He believed if France surrendered to Germany, by signing the armistice, France would have more success in the war. The armistice, an agreement to stop fighting for a given amount of time, was signed on June 22, 1940, determining the end of the Battle of France 3 days later. The armistice allowed Germany to occupy 2/3 of France, leaving the last third unoccupied. Pétain was named the chief of state in the remaining 1/3, Vichy France. This armistice angered many French citizens who believed the agreement strengthened Germany at the expense of France, so those who disagreed found promise in other patriotic voices. Because Germany had all the power over the French government, they were targeting government and military personnel to gain information about French operatives. This made lives of those employed in those sectors difficult. Charles de Gaulle was a World War I veteran, 2-star general, and a brigadier general when Germany took over France. He fled to London to make a statement instead of surrendering and strengthening Germany with the hope of one day returning to a once again free France. From London, with intentions like Pétain's to help France, de Gaulle interacted with independent French citizens who also refused to accept the German occupation. There, he recorded many speeches on the BBC network with the intentions of inspiring French people. The first speech he recorded referenced his impassioned opposition to the previously signed armistice. Another key speech that was re-recorded on June 22, 1940, was the Free French speech. This speech was recorded with the intention of inspiring all Frenchmen who want to remain free to listen to my voice and follow me. Long live Free France in honor and independence, because although they were currently under German and Italian tutelage, they'd fight back and win back France. After Charles de Gaulle left London, Jean Moulin, a native Frenchman, became part of the Free France movement. Earlier in his life, Moulin was drafted into the French army during World War I, but had not experienced combat. As a result, he was ill-prepared for the bloodshed in 1940. When Germany invaded the area where Moulin had lived, he chose to reject any command forced upon him. When the Germans wanted Moulin to sign a document falsely accusing the Senegalese French army troops for civilian massacres, he refused and was sent to jail. He escaped his captivity, and upon learning that de Gaulle, the fearless leader of the resistance, had gone to London with the intention of recruiting help from the Allies and other groups, Murat knew he must follow. By joining de Gaulle, his tragic experiences with the Germans awoke his leadership abilities that inspired French people to resist. After Charles de Gaulle's speeches reached all different people across France, groups started to spring up around the country secretly working against the German occupation. While the exact number of resistance groups is unknown, there were many who participated in different acts of rebellion. Harassing German occupiers helped give a familiar definition of a resistor, as those actions could be turned into scenes of arrest, executions, or tortures. Many of the French military, which was made up of all men, were captured, so the resistance didn't include many military personnel or men. Getting from France to Spain through the Pyrenees Mountains was the way Jews, American, and British pilots who'd fallen over enemy lines needed to go to get out of German sight. To cross the mountains, most people paid a guide to take them. Guides could be Republican soldiers of the Spanish Civil War, smugglers, other Jewish refugees, or members of the resistance. Another way to withstand the enemy was to use guerrilla warfare tactics by sabotaging communication and transportation of the German and French who fought against the resistors. One of the resistance groups responsible for these tactics was the Maquis. They were a small pocket of resistors who lived in the mountains of Vichy, France. These tactics became critical later when the resistance assisted Allied forces prepare for D-Day. The Gestapo was the German secret police who mainly targeted political enemies of the Nazi regime during World War II. Their way of leadership was very twisted, as they felt the best way to make the government think they were protecting their people was to grant them protective custody, which meant a witness or other individual can be taken into custody to protect those from a real threat. But the Gestapo changed that to benefit them. They used this to their advantage by arresting innocent people and putting them under what was thought to be protection, but these protection places were concentration camps. Protective custody became their fiercest weapon against the resistors and throughout the war. To overcome the Gestapo, who interfered with the communication of the resistors, the resistance used codes, secret newspapers, and secret buildings to protect fighters and secure private information. D-Day, Operation Overlord, or more formally known as the Battle of Normandy, was the final hurrah of World War II. It was June 6, 1944, when approximately 156,000 American, British, and Canadian forces landed on the beaches of the heavily fortified coast of the Normandy region that stretched for 50 miles. With the help of the resistance, the Allies created a deception to mislead the Germans on the date and location of the attack. Hitler, believing this advancement in Normandy only there to coax the Germans away from the North Sinai River, remained in place, allowing victory for the Allies. The resistance of the French against the Germans was tragic, starting from the loss in the Battle of France. But with the help of de Gaulle, Murat, and the French citizens, the war ended. From the end of the war, most French people started fresh and victorious, but others, such as Pétain, didn't. Philippe Pétain played along with Germany after the Battle of France because he thought that it would later benefit France. From this odd idea, people started figuring out that he was actually a German puppet, leading to his downfall, after he was accused for treason against France. At first, Pétain was given a death sentence and France was left leaderless, but fortunately, de Gaulle was named head of France and trusted, unlike Pétain. As head of France, de Gaulle made the decision to terminate Pétain's death sentence and change it to a life imprisonment. The resistance was an umbrella term for many desperate groups, and members came from all walks of life. Young and old, rich and poor, Gauls and communists. Although they didn't actually lead to the victorious Allied outcome of the war, in using their own tactics and strategies, the energy and enthusiasm they created for France pushed the nation to fight harder and more deliberately, to defeat the German, Belgian, and Italian militaries to regain France for themselves. France relied on the fearless, dedicated, and strong leadership of those strong-minded resistors to show them the way into the outcome they all wanted: a free France. In the end, they got what they all worked tirelessly for: a strong, flourishing, free France.